Hey, I want to take a minute and I want to go over a video. This is a longer one. Deconstruction is a big movement right now. And I would like to just kind of have a conversation about this. My hope is I'm setting a timer right now because I'd like to do this in about 10 minutes, including the video. So let's take a look at together. This is a popular person who's deconstructed. Let's really hear him out. What would we say as a Christian to someone who is deconstruction, or what points would we, kind of point out when it comes to somebody who's deconstructing? For one, I don't necessarily think deconstructing is a bad idea. I think deconstruction can actually lead you to a deeper faith. I know that I've reevaluated what I believe over and over and over and over again, and I continue to do that because I think it's wise. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this real quick. Let's see here. Here we go. Whoop. Let's see here. Here we go.
Have abandoned the authority of God and made themselves their own authority, essentially becoming their own God. You may have heard that before. I definitely have, because I used to think it and I used to say it. That is, until I deconstructed. I may have put it a little less harshly and said something like, you're leaning on your own understanding instead of leaning on God. But the implication was clear. These people who deconstructed were pridefully trusting themselves rather than trusting God. Now, of course, I see things differently now. I don't speak for everyone who's deconstructed or is deconstructing, but I do think that it's helpful, because there's so much talk about it, to hear from somebody who's sort of been through the process. Because I think we can all understand one another a little bit better. My deconstruction didn't start with the decision to lean on my own understanding. And honestly, it felt a lot like the opposite of that. When I was a Christian, I spent a lot of time making sure that what I believed was true. And that usually meant going to sources that had arguments that supported what I already believed. But it turns out that was pretty difficult to do without running into ideas that were critical of Christianity, because those were the very ideas that I was going to those sources to develop a defense for. And that's when I learned that the bulk of people in a lot of different disciplines, whether that be biology or astronomy, geology, psychology, anthropology, archaeology, neuroscience, and in some cases, biblical studies, had come to conclusions that called my particular conservative evangelical Christian belief system into question. This shook me up a lot. And for the first time in my life, I seriously considered the question, what if I'm wrong? I'd never really done that before. I kept reading, and eventually I got to, I think I might be wrong. And then I kept reading some more, and eventually I landed on, I'm pretty sure I'm wrong. I was scared. I was unsettled. I was confused. But I felt like I had a choice. I, a guy with only a bachelor's degree who had read a few books, could conclude that all these people who had devoted their lives to studying these subjects so deeply were wrong. Or I could trust them, essentially leaning on their understanding. I can already hear the old me saying, aha, I got you. You made the mistake of trusting human wisdom over God's wisdom. I never talk like that. But I don't think that that is quite the gotcha that my old self thinks that it is, because I think that my particular understanding of God back in those days was actually based on my adherence to a very particular school of thought about God, a 21st century American conservative evangelical Christian one. And so even though I would have told you that I got my view of God from the Bible and from the Holy Spirit, that's what I was trusting, I was actually getting my understanding of the Bible and the Holy Spirit, how the Holy Spirit worked, from people, specifically conservative, or mostly conservative evangelical Christians. So I was trusting in a group of people in both scenarios. And I feel like I've got sufficient reason to choose to trust the specialist. I mean, I'm not going to try to convince you of that. That's a whole nother video in and of itself, but that's the conclusion that I came to. I mean, they don't claim to be infallible or inerrant, but I do believe that they are my best hope at understanding what is actually true. Now, I am not saying that there aren't Christians who agree with scientific truth. In fact, some of the experts that I read in those areas, especially initially, were in fact Christians. So making a decision to trust the specialist did not necessitate me no longer being a Christian. It's just that trusting them necessitated me becoming a different kind of Christian than I was. Eventually, in my case, Following that rabbit hole led to my deconversion. It's a long story. There's several podcasts about it. It's probably going to be a bore. And listen, I could still be wrong. I still ask myself that on a regular basis. What if I'm wrong? I mean, listen, maybe all these PhDs are deceived. Maybe they're all a victim to some sort of agenda, or they're perpetrating some sort of agenda. That's not the impression that I get. At the end of the day, I think you can develop your understanding of people who have deconstructed by listening to what other people say about them, or you can just listen to them and take them at their word.
All right. Well, that's us listening to Rhett and taking him at his word. There's specifically some things that I kind of want to address with this. I was kind of just jotting some things down, just kind of listening to him a little bit. One of the things that we see is that he really does, and he talks about this towards the end, that he trades one set of expert opinion for another set of expert opinion, and he says that it's a matter of reason, that one is more reasonable. That goes to show that this is really not a scientific argument. This is a philosophical argument. When we start venturing into areas of truth and trying to discover what is true, when we look at the origins of the universe, when we look at different things like that, there is nothing that ultimately proves that naturalism is true, that something came from nothing. It is, in their eyes, that is a plausible conclusion to come to. I think it's a ridiculous conclusion to come through. I think it's foolishness, but that's the conclusion that they come to. And so, at that particular point in time, we have to ask ourselves, is it more reasonable to believe that there is something greater than our universe that brought it into existence, or did just something come from nothing? And so anyway, and he talks about these two sets of experts. You have, as if Christians, and he even says this, there are Christian experts out there. So I really don't know exactly, I think the question that I would ask him is what led him to trust these naturalistic experts that led him to thinking that this is a more plausible perspective, as far as deconverting. Not only that, I just think that he's going down this rabbit hole of saying, like, this is a more logical way to view things, and realistically, I would say that I don't necessarily believe him. I just don't believe him. I think every person that I've talked to, when it comes to them seriously deconstructing and walking away from their faith, there's an underlying emotional reasons to why. And generally it has to do with more social justice than it does with the science. The science is a way in which they can sell it to themselves, but ultimately there is something within them that they don't like about Christianity. Either it's the way in which it treats a particular, what they might think a minority, or the fact that Christianity is exclusive, the fact that God is just and there is a hell. These are things that people don't like about God. And I think that this is, and again, I think that you should ask these questions. I'm not saying that you should just accept them blindly, but I think that these are the emotional things that begin to sever those ties, and then they latch on to other expert opinions. And so, when I look at this, again, he's just trading one authority for another. What makes him trust those particular experts when ultimately they are just presenting another philosophical view, because they don't know. And not only that, I'm wondering also if there is an emotional reason, something he felt wasn't fair. And so I think that that's where I would kind of drive this conversation. That's how I would have this conversation, kind of ask those questions. And the whole thing isn't, I got you. That's not the point. He still says that he could be wrong. I think what's so interesting is I think it's really cool that he's going, hey, look, I might be wrong with this. I think that we should always check ourselves. Even Christians, we should always, is this wrong? And really dive in to the exploration of going after truth. but I wonder how hard he is railing against his current worldview. Is he exploring his current understanding as hard as he, or is he, better way of putting it, I would encourage him to even deconstruct currently what he's embracing. Because I think that people, when they deconstruct, they're really okay with deconstructing their religious perspective, but I wonder how hard they deconstruct the new perspective that they're bringing in. Because I would really love to hear his thoughts on how he has been tested and in some things that he just disagrees with when it comes to even a naturalistic world. But the worldview, there has to be something, and so anyway, these are my thoughts. I hope they're helpful. The whole point is to kind of maybe simplify the thought a little bit, and how to engage maybe your friends when it comes to these different worldviews. And maybe they are right now deconstructing. Maybe you can help them navigate the conversation. Anyway, thanks for joining us on Dialectic. If you like what you heard, I think you can subscribe. I don't really know how all this works, but we hope to continue at least once a week bringing you a video where we are diving through a particular question, worldview, pop culture topic, something along those lines, and addressing it in about 10 minutes. So I'll see you next week.